One of the great American traditions in terms of our government is the opening prayer on Capitol Hill. And we're speaking now with Howard Mortman. He is the communications director for C-SPAN, the public affairs cable network, who has written a fascinating story about this, a story that I guess should have been told a long time ago. When Rabbis Bless Congress, the great American story of Jewish prayers on Capitol Hill. This is from Cherry Orchard Books. How did you come to write this, Howard?
So, Jim, thank you. This is very much part of my work at C-SPAN. I spend a lot of time watching Congress as part of my job, for better or for worse. And I've always been fascinated, just as a quirk. As you just said, Congress opens up each session with a prayer. It's actually the very first thing that they do is pray, and that's even before they do the Pledge of Allegiance. They pray, and that's even before then they get to debating and voting. As an institution, it goes to the very beginning of the founding of Congress. Even before there was a Bill of Rights, they actually enshrined there would be prayer and a chaplain in Congress. So it goes back to the very beginning, and just that moment when there's a chaplain or a guest chaplain praying in Congress, it looks like nothing else that happens on the floor of either the House or the Senate. So just as a Congress junkie, as a junkie of American lover of American political history, I was just fascinated just in general about this long tradition. Now, I have to admit and say out right here, I'm Jewish, so when a rabbi has been a guest chaplain in Congress, I kind of perk up a little bit more and was very intrigued by rabbis who gave the prayer. But just in general, the institution of prayer in Congress has been little reported on, and it's so ingrained in the tradition that I personally just think deserves a lot more attention.
It's not really, I don't believe, is it enshrined in the Constitution? This is tradition, right?
This is very much tradition. This is not constitutional. This is the rules of Congress, the rules of the House and the Senate. They both have a chaplain who is paid for by taxpayers. They get a salary. They have staff. The prayer itself is a rule and a custom of Congress. It is not in the Constitution. The White House does not have an official chaplain. The Supreme Court opens with a little prayer with a mention of God, but there's no chaplain there. So this is very much a feature, a distinction of the legislative branch.
Now, Jews have not always been welcome in every corridor in this country. How far back does the tradition of allowing rabbis to take part in this ceremony go?
So thank you for that, because then it narrows down to what is the focus of my book, which is again a sliver of this piece of history. So there have been chaplains praying in Congress going back to the very beginning, back to the 1780s. Guest chaplains, people who are filling in for the official chaplains, men of the cloth, began in the 1850s. The first Jewish clergyman to pray was in 1860. His name was Rabbi Morris Raphael. President James Buchanan was there. James Buchanan was president at the time, and it was on the eve of the Civil War. And here comes a rabbi praying in Congress. He looked like nothing else they've ever seen. Some of the coverage in the New York Times at the time was talking about how this man in costume was praying in front of Congress, and some of the remarks from other members of Congress were shocked by this novelty of a rabbi in Congress. Now there have been about over 600 rabbi prayers since, so the novelty has kind of worn off, but at the time, it was definitely something they'd never seen before.
I would assume that since rabbis were given this opportunity, that there have been other religions maybe not as dominant in American life. For example, Islamic imams, for example, perhaps those of some Far Eastern faiths have also been allowed. I would assume that by today that quite a few different groups of people have been represented among those who are chaplains or guest chaplains.
That is absolutely correct, Jim. You're right. And as time has gone on and as America has changed, there have been, as you say, imams. There have been Buddhists. The Dalai Lama has been a guest chaplain in the Senate. Native Americans have prayed. And maybe shocking most of all to American tradition, women have prayed in Congress, and that that began in the 1970s when we kind of saw the first women. So the religious demographics have modified as American, as more folks in America have been accepted in higher levels. But yes, so many religions who have representatives in America have also had their men and women of cloth pray in Congress.
Mm-hmm. And I would have assumed that this is true. And in the book, When Rabbis Bless Congress, we discover that, in fact, it is true here. There's a chapter that is titled, let's see if I can find it. Yes, The Bully Pulpit Mixing Politics into Prayers. When you are addressing a body of people whose word matters, whose decisions become law, I would think the temptation to stray into politics would be overwhelming for many.
Yeah, you're totally right about that. The temptation is there. And just to say it flat out, they are urged not to do that. They are urged to address the members and even to address God. I mean, this is really talking to a higher level. They are not there to be politicians. They're not voting. The official House and Senate chaplains don't vote on legislation, so therefore they should not get involved in politics and policy and what the debate is. Now, here comes the big however. However, it does happen. And the however is that there are clergy members who have strong opinions, who happen to be in the House and the Senate giving the opening prayers on days when there is major legislation happening, when there are big votes looming, big issues that Congress is addressing. So they may not be outright saying, vote aye or nay or on H.R. 652, to be that specific, but they might be urging general advice on, could be immigration, how we treat immigrants to America, or just general thoughts about something that might be in the news that day. So they do get away with it sometimes, just like everybody in America has strong opinions, and even though they shouldn't and they're not supposed to, there are political or policy-oriented messages sometimes given from the rostrum.
And I would assume that in this day and age, when we talk about removing under God from the Pledge of Allegiance and in God we trust from our coins, I would have to assume that somebody has put forward the suggestion of having no chaplains whatsoever.
Yeah, that is a perennial issue. There are atheists who have filed suit in court repeatedly against the practice of having a prayer at all, or saying that if there's a prayer, it should be praying to no God at all. It should be completely non-denominational and not recognizing higher authority. Now, I have to say with a big caveat, what I do in my book, I don't come down. This is not a church-state argument. What I'm doing in my book is really talking about history. Again, going back to the rabbis, there have been over 600 times rabbis open a prayer, and for me that's historically fascinating to see who they are and what they said. So this is not an argument for or against church-state. What I'm doing, the only thing I would say is that the practice of opening Congress in prayer and even local legislative bodies or zoning commissions, state legislatures, they all open in prayer as well, and that has been upheld in several Supreme Court cases that have been brought by atheists and others who don't want this practice at all. So again, the reason why it's being upheld is because it is grounded at the very beginning, and these are rules that Congress can set for themselves. So it's never been overturned. It definitely is controversial, but it's always, the ruling is always.
We're speaking with Howard Mortman. He is the communications director for C-SPAN, the cable public affairs channel. And we have his book before us here, When Rabbis Bless Congress. It's published by Cherry Orchard Books and subtitled The Great American Story of Jewish Prayers on Capitol Hill. And I couldn't pass up this at all here under your Section 8, America the Exceptional. And here's the chapter title, An Irish Rabbi Walks into the Senate Chamber. Okay, what's the punchline to that title?
Thank you for picking up on that. I appreciate that. That is, that chapter really brings in just examples of where rabbis have gone in front of Congress and just basically said how great this country is. This goes back to one of the basic premises. There was an Irish rabbi who is cited in that, but it goes back to the basic premise that this is by allowing prayer in Congress, in opening up each session of Congress, Jews and rabbis can do something that is you can't even do in Israel. There's no prayers that open the Knesset. So basically, if you want to be a rabbi and open up a legislative session, you have to come to America and do it. Rabbis who have come and prayed and have become rabbis and prayed in Congress reflect an amazing cross-section of immigrants to this country, Holocaust survivors. There have been survivors of Auschwitz, believe it or not, who survived the concentration camps, the death camps, came to America, became rabbis, and ended up praying in the literal center of democracy. So if you even love the the sense of victory of that, it's just an amazing bit of history. And so they've these rabbis have come and in their prayers they've incorporated how great America is messaging and talking about the Liberty Bell and just other great iconic American institutions.
And also from the book When Rabbis Bless Congress, a couple of back-to-back chapters here. Rabbis borrow from Christians, and then Christians borrow from Jews. That somehow those two chapters sound quintessentially American.
Yeah, it definitely so. Because I have to be honest, I have to be fair about this. Even though this book does focus on rabbis, it is such a tiny number of prayers that have been given to college in Congress by rabbis. Over 400 rabbis have given over 600 prayers. And that's enough to do a study, but it's not enough to say that it's dominating. The realistic thing is to say that this is a predominantly Christian nation. I don't think that's a shock. So when rabbis pray, they have incorporated language that appeals to a broad section of America and the Christians. On the flip side, when there have been many chaplains, official chaplains or guest chaplains, non-Jewish Christians, who have gone to the Old Testament, to the Bible, and have cited some of the Jewish prophets in their prayers to drive home a point, such as like Micah or Isaiah and others that you'll find in the Old Testament, and they've incorporated them into their prayers. So it does sound a little incongruous, but it's in Congress.
And when you put together a book like this, When Rabbis Bless Congress, you'll go into it with certain expectations of what you'll find, but there must inevitably have been some surprises. If you could describe one or more of the bigger shocks, the darn, I never would have guessed that moments when you researched When Rabbis Bless Congress.
Yeah, two things. On a very personal level, one thing that I've done as a result of this research is put all the rabbi prayers that exist on video in the C-SPAN era. Basically, I put them all on YouTube. And I've done that kind of mechanically as part of the research. One of the rabbis from 1994 in the Senate, who has since died, his name is Rabbi Maurice Lyons. He gave an amazing prayer in the Senate where he evoked an old Jewish prayer that goes back to the Torah and spoke Hebrew or in the Senate and raised his hands. It's basically blessing countenance upon the congregation, and he treated that as the congregation, the Senate as his congregation. He spoke in Hebrew. I always thought that was an interesting prayer that he gave. The story gets more interesting because after I put this on YouTube, like earlier this year, Rabbi Maurice Lyons of St. Louis, who died, his family was marking the anniversary of his death. In Jewish tradition, it's called a yahrzeit when you remember someone's death. And they googling his name, and they came upon this YouTube that I had posted. And it was the grandson of Rabbi Maurice Lyons, who had never seen his prayer. I don't even know if he's ever heard his voice like that or give a prayer at all as a rabbi. And he sent me a note saying, "This is amazing. I found this, my grandfather praying in the Senate thanks to you." And I said back then, it's even more amazing you would send me this note because this really makes a personal connection to this whole tradition. So that, for me, that kind of stuck out as just a really sweet moment to be able to reach somebody through the power of video and the power of the prayer.
Our guest is Howard Mortman. He is the communications director for C-SPAN, the public affairs cable network. He's the author of When Rabbis Bless Congress. It's published by Cherry Orchard Books and subtitled The Great American Story of Jewish Prayers on Capitol Hill.